specifically interested in Scottish Bronze Age food vessels. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my research. I'm going to start off by explaining the subject of my PhD, and then I'm going to focus on my analytical or theoretical approach. So the subject of my PhD is food vessel pottery, which nowadays is a label that we use to describe one of the ceramic prehistoric types that can be found throughout the British Isles, and which dates to the early Bronze Age generally. This type of pottery is mainly found in funerary contexts, both with cremations and inhumations. Sometimes they contain cremations as well. And they're often found in flat kissed graves or beneath barrows or cairns. And chronologically they overlap with other types of Bronze Age ceramics such as beakers or various types of cinerary urns. And in Scotland there are about 500 or 550 recognised examples of food vessels. And you can see the distribution and extent of the corpus on this map here. So in terms of morphology, the food vessel type is pretty heterogeneous. Here you can see just 4 examples of vessels that are considered to belong to this type. And as you can see, they vary quite considerably in size, shape, and decoration. So very broadly speaking, food vessels are considered to range from 10 to 20 centimeters in height. They are conventionally split into 2 main forms of bowls and vases. The decoration on these is impressed or incised and usually covers the whole vessel, but pots with very sparse decoration or no decoration at all are also found. So it's immediately apparent that this ceramic category accommodates a very wide variety of vessels. And as such, the distinctiveness of this ceramic class is not very explicit. So it could be questioned whether these pots should be classed as one ceramic type at all. So the definition of the type is very broad, and pretty much anything that is not a beaker or a big cinerary urn could be classed as a food vessel, without much consideration of what this label actually entails. The term food vessel was originally coined by early antiquarians who needed to distinguish it from the already recognized beakers and urns. And it was also assumed originally that these were meant to contain offerings of food for the afterlife. And although it is accepted that these were funerary in nature, we don't really know what the original function was. So there's been some studies done on the residues, organic residues that have been found in some of these vessels, and some of them suggest that they might have originally contained porridge, honey, wheat, or some sort of dairy product. But these types of studies are quite limited in number, and the results are still not very conclusive, so that's still very much an open question. But despite these ambiguities regarding both the function of these pots, as well as the general coherence of the ceramic type, there's been quite a number of very elaborate food vessel typologies developed for Scottish food vessels, and none of them are universally accepted now. Here you can see these 2 examples of them, one by Child and one by Burgess. And these typically reduce the vessels to these slightly ambiguous criteria, like Child's typology, or even worse, to these very schematic, idealized drawings. And because these were developed quite a while ago now, and they were often based on just a portion of the existing corpus, they're quite outdated now and also quite questionable in terms of how valid these categories actually are. But nonetheless, they're still very much perpetuated quite blindly by a lot of scholarly articles as well as excavation reports. And it seems like the main focus of these typologies is on a variation in form, and quite often very subtle variation in form, which you can see in this example here. So in this top pair, these 2 vessels are considered to be 2 different types of vases, even though the overall appearance is almost identical. And in the bottom pair, the pot on the left is classified as a bowl, and the one on the right is classified as a vase, even though again the overall form is almost identical. So it seems like this focus on classification is somewhat exaggerating these subtle variations in form to create these sort of pseudo-distinctions or these sort of conceptual categories that don't really translate to anything at all. And at the same time, it's being claimed that this overall food vessel category is distinctive enough to consider it as a whole in opposition to beakers and cider urns. So the focus is very much on difference. So the difference both within the corpus itself as well as in defining the corpus against other Bronze Age ceramics. And in my research instead, I would like to focus not on looking for these points of distinction, but rather for the sort of links and interaction between different types of Bronze Age pottery, as well as within the food vessel corpus itself. And as such, I would like to look for the elements that are shared and that reappear within these different assemblages. And as such, my approach is very much influenced by assemblage theory, which is an approach that conceptualizes things as assemblages, or as assortments of relationships, or a sort of coming together of things and relationships that culminate in what we see as single entities. And when we apply this approach or this perspective to the study of food vessels, we can then begin to see food vessels as assemblages. So we can see food vessels as sort of networks of different things, relationships, forces, materials, and so on. So a food vessel can therefore be an assemblage of a number of things, which I don't think you can see on this wonderful graph here. So a food vessel would be an assemblage of the potter, the clay, the creative engagement between these two, various firing techniques, construction techniques, as well as different design forms, as well as different decorative motifs too. So in this context, we can start to think about these various decorative motifs or design features as different parts of this assemblage, rather than thinking about these decorative motifs, for example, as these very static, fixed types or categories. And in this sense, we can see the food vessels and the process of making a food vessel as being situated within these different networks of referentiality. So in this case, the making of every new food vessel is situated within a broader field of citations, let's say. So in that case, when you're making a food vessel, you will be referring to, drawing on, recalling, and transforming elements from other assemblages. And that would be assemblages of the overall Bronze Age pottery tradition in a certain area, or an assemblage of the sort of food vessel corpus and the different motifs that you can find there. And from this perspective, we can also see the food vessel corpus as an interconnected assemblage, which works at different scales of reference as well. So it's both inter and intra-referential. So we can recognize different motifs that are being repeated throughout the corpus, and we can also recognize that some of these motifs will invoke some of the decoration that's found on beakers or cinnamon urns or other earlier types of pottery as well. And so here are some examples of these decorative motifs, which you can maybe see. One of them is probably the most common decorative motif, which is the so-called herringbone. And you can see it on the left there, that's a beaker, and these are two different food vessels. Another example is a sort of band of horizontal and vertical line segments, which you can see again on the left on the beaker and here on the food vessel. We also find, and the last example is this sort of band of cross-hatched lozenges, which we find, again, this is a cinnamon urn, and this is a food vessel, but we find them on beakers as well. So we can see that these motifs are sort of recurring elements of this assemblage, and we can see that this demonstrates the maker's familiarity with these overall traditions and this sort of creative repertoire. And I think that by mapping these elements, mapping the sort of distribution of these different decorative motifs and design features, we can then try and understand these associations and interactions between these different traditions. So again, focus on the things that are shared rather than trying to come up with these very reductive sort of imposed types that maybe don't really translate into anything, but try to divide these assemblages into these very specific sections. So hopefully my PhD will help to demonstrate this. And this is all from me today, so thank you very much.